Ready, everybody? Yep. It is 6:30. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Thank you, everyone, for coming in this evening. First item on the agenda this evening is review and approval of the minutes from the prior meeting. If anybody has any additions or corrections, if they'd be kind enough to share them. Otherwise, I'd look for an approval on the minutes, please.
Make the motion to approve.
Have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That would take care of our minutes. Three public hearings tonight. The first is for a conditional use permit for a fence for the Solid property, if I enunciated that correctly.
All right, so I just pulled up the fence plan up here on the screen so everyone can see. So this is at 1002 3rd Street Southeast, and according to their fence plan here, they're just proposing to put their fence on the south property line and then connect up to the corner of the deck back here. But the distance between this property line and the proposed location of the fence would be over 3 feet. So really just the one side would be within that 3-foot distance. And so with this one, staff are recommending the conditions of getting an access agreement with this property owner down here to the south, and then acknowledgement of a 10-foot easement along the rear property line.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Ian? If not, I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing. If anyone has anything they would like to share on this conditional use permit, if they'd be kind enough to come up to the podium and start with your name and address, please.
My name is Eric Norrie. I'm at 505 4th Avenue Northwest. I have some concerns about this conditional use permit. My biggest concern is that you're putting a contingency basically on the permit that the owner get what you're calling a neighbor access agreement before building the fence is basically like saying no. And state law requires you to say yes or no to a building project within 60 days. And by saying yes, but you have to have this really unreasonable condition you have to meet is basically blocking their project. So, the fence ordinance language currently doesn't require, it says you may require, but doesn't give reasons why, a neighbor agreement of some sort, but that needs to be, written by a lawyer. That must, and you're saying it must be notarized. I know you're given a form that's available, but I highly recommend that no neighbors sign that, or even you guys recommend that, that it changes the deed to the property before a fence can get built and is filed in Manorville. That condition, how in the world do you expect these people to do that in a 30 to 60-day time period so they can build their fence? I mean, if they have to get a lawyer involved to do all that, they're looking at next year, maybe if lucky, after they spend a bunch of money trying to get this neighbor agreement worked out. So by placing this unreasonable condition on this permit will cause the fence project to be stopped now, immediately, with no guarantee that it will ever be able to get built. That the owners and the owner has to spend that money on the attorney. So I'm really concerned that this would violate Minnesota Statute 1599. I suggest the city allow the applicant, if they're going to require some sort of neighbor agreement, to write their own agreement and get legal advice and add a clause that everybody holds everybody harmless in case something comes up. I request that you approve this permit for this fence without any contingencies or conditions, so this applicant can be 100% sure and approved tonight that they can build their fence starting tomorrow. That's my concerns that I have about this CPU, or this permit you're offering with the contingency. Thank you.
Any other comments? If not, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Thank you. Gentlemen, your thoughts?
One thing I notice here, and this is probably not the first time, I just noticed it this time, it looks like there might be a gate or something connecting the corner of the garage to the existing fence to the neighbor to the east. Presumably that neighbor has had that fence up prior to having access agreements. So by putting that gate there and closing it off, the neighbor to the east now cannot maintain their side of the fence because they don't have an agreement with the applicant. So, it may be of benefit to have that agreement in place before that gate gets put there and closes it off. Or maybe it's something we should just think about with the improved fence ordinance, considering there's an existing fence there, and we're just attaching to it. Does that make sense, Ian?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
So this might be something we need to discuss when we get later on in the meeting in the agenda, but, as of right now, and I think the way we've been doing it, we haven't denied anybody's request for this particular reason, so.
Any other thoughts or comments?
Ian, is that little chunk gonna be fenced off in the back?
You're saying like
That,
where the trees are?
yep, so down at the bottom there,
Yeah,
is that gonna be open?
yeah,
Okay.
this will be open, yep.
Okay.
It just goes from the corner of the deck to the
Sure.
property line.
Okay.
According to that plan.
Yep.
I've been absent the last few meetings. Have we received any different direction from council or the city attorney in regards to our fence ordinance the way it says today?
Not to my recollection, Dan, or, no?
No. Okay.
If there's no other thoughts or comments, I would look for a motion, please.
I'll make a motion to approve that they get the agreement from both property owners with that gate. Because of the gate on the, like Paul had mentioned, they should have agreements with both neighbors.
We've gotten approval with said condition. Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That would be our recommendation to the city council. Next public hearing is for another fence, conditional use permit fence for the Planton property.
This is the proposed fence plan for this property, which is at 704 12th Ave Northwest. And so you can see here, generally the fence will be located within that 3-foot distance on both sides. This is a corner lot, so both of these are considered the side property lines. So with this one, just recommending access agreements from both of the neighbors on each side, and then acknowledgement of a 5-foot easement on the south property line.
So this one is not gonna be put on the property line, but within the current 3-foot setback?
And is the fence going on the south side of the property going on the easement?
Well, within the easement.
Within the easement? Okay. Any other questions?
Do you know how close
I don't know the exact distance, but to my knowledge, it's within that 3-foot distance as we discussed with the property owner.
The drawing leaves some room for interpretation.
Well, I'm just curious, you know, because if it's 2 feet 11 inches, you know, I mean, they could move it in another inch and they wouldn't, otherwise they could, you know, if they're gonna get the access agreements, they could move it out to the property line then.
Maybe trees in the way,
Yeah.
it's hard to tell from the image.
Yeah. Nope. Just curious.
If there's no other questions on this side of the conversation, I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing. Again, this is for the conditional use permit for the plant and fence. If anyone has anything they'd like to share, if they come up to the podium, please.
Okay, so originally, we're having Apex do our fence, they came out, they marked everything, they started putting in posts, however, we realized that the utilities go right through that 3-foot line, so we're either gonna bring it in 2 feet, which would cut off 5 feet of our property, or we're gonna put it closer to our property line to maintain where our neighbor currently has trees. Our neighbor next door, Condurt, it's a different owner, but their fence is 5 feet in because they have shrubs where we don't. So it's either at this point we bring the fence in 5 feet from our property line and completely cut off that side, or we can get approval from our neighbors, and I know both my neighbors, so.
I assume you're Mr. Planton?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
All right, once again, Eric Norrie, 505 4th Avenue Northwest. Yeah, the issue that came up about exactly where the fence is gonna be is basically, if he's granted to put it within 3 feet or the property line, is kind of irrelevant for what he's doing today. Because the way this access easement agreement that this unreasonable contractor asking him to do, it's not just for him. This is for every person that he sells his house to for the next 500 years. And so even if he were to set it in a couple feet for now, the next person can come and they can tear it down and they can put it right on the property line forever. So I just want to clarify that it doesn't really matter right now if he's setting it in 3 feet or whatever. The other things, I have similar concerns the last time. You're putting a contingency on him it's not mentioned in the published ordinance at all why you're doing this. You're not giving any explanation on why you're making him do this. Your current ordinance doesn't have the published neighbor agreement attached to it or anything along those lines. So I highly recommend that he and his neighbors get legal advice on that agreement. And instead of having an agreement that goes on perpetually forever for everybody else that moves into that house that's on the deed, I recommend that only licensed and insured contractors should be able to go on the outside of his fence onto the neighbor's property to do work. I think it's unreasonable that he should be able to just allow anybody to go over there at any time and do work, because I think it could be a problem with the insurance company. And if he sells his house, if a new neighbor moves in, there's a good chance the new neighbor is not going to probably want to follow that agreement. And if they don't follow that agreement, I'd like you to make a point that he understands that the city is not going to enforce any kind of access on anybody's property. They're not going to send the police department over there with a deed, with this contract, this neighbor agreement, and say, you guys got to do this. And nor is the city going to show up and help with that. So if there is ever an access problem in the future, it's going to be a civil issue that this individual has to handle all by themselves with no help from the city. Even though the city helped write the agreement, the city enforced the agreement on him, they put that contingency on him with intent that maintenance is going to get done. That agreement doesn't require any maintenance at all. It doesn't require any mowing. It doesn't require anything other than the location of the fence. So those are some of my concerns. So I think I don't believe you should be putting any contingencies on his fence permit. I think you should allow him to build his fence on his own property without getting any kind of neighbor agreement worked out with his neighbors that may cost him money with an attorney. It should cost his neighbors money with attorney. And if he really understands the neighbor access agreement, I think pushing that on his neighbors isn't really something that it would be a good thing that he should do. So, please approve his permit without any contingencies, so he can get building on his fence right away, without having to contact an attorney, and get that fence built yet this year. Thank you.
Anyone else? If not, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Sounds like the process is working.
I think there's a point of clarity, and I might be wrong about this, but, if a fence is dismantled, it is not allowed to be rebuilt without another permit, am I correct?
When you say permit, what are you referring to, sir?
If somebody dismantles a fence, they have to reapply for a permit to build another one, whether it's in the same place or moved.
I don't believe, that would not be my interpretation of it.
I thought we talked about this last meeting, about whether or not that was the case, when we were talking about, improvements and such. I thought maybe Linda had looked it up for us or something during the previous meeting.
Well,
But-
that's if there was damage. If there was damage, if there's more than 50%, and it did not have a conditional use permit to start with, then if they wanted to put it back, they would have to get one.
Okay.
Just like a building.
Right,
If
so-
it's more than 50%.
So does it follow then that if somebody, intentionally removed their fence, 100% of the fence, that they would also have to reapply for a permit to put another one in? I mean, the CUP makes it, yeah,
With that they got a conditional use permit,
yeah,
the conditional use permit says they can place it up to 3 feet, or within 3 feet of the property line or on the property line.
mhm,
So they wouldn't have to get another one because they have the conditional use permit that says they can
right.
go
And
to the property line.
and that CUP does not become void or dissolve when the permit in question is removed?
Unless the fence would be damaged, I think.
Because I think we have other CUPs that'll end if some condition is
Only if
ended.
the use changes.
Okay,
Otherwise, CUPs are perpetual with the building, not even with, and if the use changes, if that's a daycare, somebody else can buy it and have a daycare. They don't have to get
Right.
another conditional use permit.
okay,
So as long as the use doesn't change.
yeah. Let's keep this in mind when we get later in the agenda, because I want to come back to this for our new process.
Any thoughts on the plant and conditional use permit? Any questions? If not, I would look for a motion, please.
I'll make the motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That would be our recommendation to the city council on this conditional use permit. And the last public hearing we have is for a preliminary plat of Creekside Grove, the Shooty property.
I'll just pull up the exhibit here on the screen. But this is a rather large property kind of sandwiched between Highway 57 and 8th Avenue West. Kind of south of the county transfer area and north of the Stone Ridge subdivision. All right, so for this one, you'll notice that it's a series of outlots, no full lots just yet. Basically, the reason for this is to make it so that the property owner is able to sell off different sections of the larger parcel to different property owners for development. So 5 different outlots, A through E, largest of which is Outlot A, which is roughly the west half of the property. There's kind of this low draw that divides the property into different sections. And then the east half or so of the property has 4 different outlots, different sizes, with some proposed right-of-ways for different streets, as you can see. This is 16th Street, all the way at the very top, so this proposed street would connect with 16th, and then this proposed street would connect with Highway 57 out that way. As far as what the developments could be, there's a lot of different zoning, or the comp plan has quite a few different designations just because it's so large. So the western portion is designated for residential uses, and then the eastern portion is more residential uses in addition to commercial uses as well. Let's see. So, and as I said, because this is just outlots, that means nothing is really developable until there's further subdivisions that happen, so there'd be more approvals coming forward anyways. This really just gets it ready for the property owner to sell. Is my interpretation.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Ian?
Has the city engineer reviewed this yet? Because I noticed you've got conditions saying they have to make whatever changes he recommends, so.
Yeah, so it's still under review by the city engineer. So you're right, I did include the one condition of approval.
Okay. And we'll see this again, I presume, in a meeting coming shortly
Right.
with those changes already included for the final.
Yeah, it's kind of typical how it goes now.
So, does the property owner already have, a right-of-way to Highway 57 where they're proposing that 13th Street?
Yeah, MnDOT has approved an access point out there.
Oh, they've already got one there, okay. Yeah, there might already be some sort of driveway to go into that field, if I remember right, but...
Any other questions, gentlemen? If not, I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing. This one is for the preliminary plat of Creekside Grove. Once again, if anybody has any thoughts they'd like to share, if they'd be kind enough to come up to the microphone. Please.
Good evening. Has anybody bought this property for development, or is it still in planning stages?
When you say if someone has bought it, sir, I
Have
mean,
they
there's-
bought, well,
A developer.
has a developer already bought the property?
I believe it's still owned by the Schutte family, correct?
Right.
And I don't know if they're going to develop themselves or if they're going to sell it to someone for development.
Okay. Because I guess, I just had some questions about some easements and everything else. Didn't know if this is the right meeting or not.
Sure, I don't know if easements have been set at all, have they?
No.
Okay. Alrighty.
And forgive me, sir, before you sit down, your name and address, please.
Kyle Pearson, 501 12th Street Northwest.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Any other comments?
Kenneth Etchison, 905 North Matterville Avenue. I own some of the property, that's in question here, but we only got 3 parcels we're trying to split. It's my mother's property, so I don't know where you're getting 5 from. We're to the east of the North Park So am I on the wrong deal here, or? You said five parcels you're trying to split, right?
Well, it's one parcel that's being proposed
It
to...
wouldn't be five.
This
It'd be
is
three.
Shudia's property.
No, this should be Etchison's property is what we're talking about. So I got,
That's not what we're talking
No,
about.
that's not what we're talking about.
all right, is that happening tonight? I got a letter saying that. I thought, or unless I'm bordering the wrong one? Okay.
Yes,
then I'm-
it's everything north of the Dollar General.
Yep.
Okay, then I'm sorry, I'm here for the wrong one.
No worries. If there's nothing else, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing.
I don't know.
Thoughts? No, I mean, it's,
Yeah, it's the first step to get it taken care of.
yep. Yep.
I'd make a motion to approve.
We've got a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Be our recommendation on the preliminary plat. And the last thing on the agenda this evening is a discussion on fences and walls.
All right, so we've had new discussions about the proposed changes to our fence ordinance and the permitting process. Let's see. Pull up. Okay, so
I get it.
up to this point, we're familiar with the conditional use permit process as it relates to these fences. And so with the proposed changes, it does take into consideration what I would say is a key aspect of the existing process, which is the access agreement. And so really, a lot of the issues that we're seeing with the current ordinance, at least what I'm hearing from majority of the applicants so far, is the issues of the expense and the time that it takes to get approved for this permit. As you know, the conditional use permit can take quite a long time to get approved for, because you have to wait for a public hearing, and then ultimately the city council can do all of that. And then the cost is also pretty high, I would say, for what most people would be considering as a fair price for a fence permit. $300 application fee for a conditional use permit.
I realize fees really don't fall under the purview of the planning and zoning board, but has there been any discussion as to what the proposed fee might be for this?
So proposed, I'm proposing to break it down by the type of fence that they're proposing to build. So this is a new concept too that I proposed in the new ordinance, which is the difference between an interior fence and a perimeter fence. So an interior fence would be anything that gets built at least 2 feet from a property line. And then a perimeter fence would be anything that's within the 2 feet from a property line. So that's a change down from the 3-foot distance down to a 2-foot distance. So with that, if you're wanting to build an interior fence, then that permit fee would be $100. But if it's if it's a perimeter fence, then it's the $100 application fee. But if it's an interior fence, then it's the $50 application fee. just because with the perimeter fence, that still brings in the access agreements, and that does take some staff time, and so that application fee helps to cover that time that puts into it. Whereas an interior fence, you would only need a permit in the case where you're proposing to put it in an easement, or if you're putting it in like a front yard area, just because that also takes some amount of staff review, but just not the full amount of time as what would be required by an access agreement.
Whereas currently an interior fence or a fence off of the 3-foot,
Now it's like
setback is-
anything that's within a 3-foot distance has to pay the $300. So like, under that interpretation, we've had conditional use permits for fences that don't have any access agreements, but because they're putting it within that 3-foot distance, they just require a conditional use permit. So, with these proposed changes, that's one of the issues that this aims to solve.
but today if I'm nowhere near a property line, there is no cost or there is no permit fee associated with putting up a fence.
Right, just so long as you're not putting it in an easement.
Correct, okay.
Or, within your front yard.
Taking some cost out and adding some cost in. On par, I would assume you're taking a healthy amount of cost out.
Yeah, yep, absolutely.
Hey, Ian?
Yep.
Do you have a draft copy of Supplement A fact sheet that you note on this application?
I don't have that for you tonight, unfortunately. Time gets away sometimes.
It'd be nice to see what
Yeah.
you have included on the fact sheet.
In time for the council public hearing, I will have it done.
Next Wednesday?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
You had a few things you wanted to discuss, Paul. Would you be kind enough to refresh my memory as to what they were?
So the first item was, since this method will not use a CUP anymore, if a fence that goes through this process gets dismantled, can a fence be built in the same place or slightly different place without another permit, or will another permit be required? Because we're saying that a CUP, as long as your use doesn't change, they could rebuild it, right? Since we're not using the CUP anymore, would they be allowed to rebuild it under the existing permit? Or would they have to get another one?
If the changes are approved as written, then you would be able to completely rebuild your fence, just so long as you don't, change the location on your property. Because if you do that, then there's different checks that have to go in place, because if you move it over just 1 foot, well, maybe now you're building it in an easement or something. So that's
Well, you may need
one
a
thing.
permit to build it. Just like if your garage fell down and you're gonna rebuild your garage, you still need another permit to build the new one.
Mm-hmm.
But it wouldn't require a conditional use permit, and you could put it where it was.
Right, but we would say that the access agreements and all that stuff that were in place before are still valid, right? So really, their permit would then be just the $100 fee. They wouldn't need the other recording fees because it's already been done from the previous permit.
Those are perpetual.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So a fence permit would be perpetual in the same way a conditional use permit would be perpetual. Is that a fair statement to say?
Right, yeah,
Okay.
so it would be not exactly like a building permit, but similar in the sense that we would keep a record of all of that here at City Hall, so we know which properties have approved fences. We would have the site plan showing where it's supposed to be on the property. So people, if they wanted to make any changes, they could see, oh, well, now I have to, apply for a new permit and all of that, because it's in a different location. If that makes sense.
It's consistent with the theory that properly permitted and approved construction is allowed to persist until alterations are made,
Right. Exactly.
which is what the building code would require.
Yep.
So it's consistent with that code as well. On that same topic, the building code, just as a segue, as a point of clarity for item B2 about retaining walls,
Yep.
that 4 feet is measured from the bottom of the footing.
The bottom of the
according to the building code. Not that you need to necessarily change the language to describe that, but just to be consistent with the building code for when a permit is required.
You said B2?
Item B2, yeah. It says 4 feet in height, so it's just a point of clarity that how to measure that 4 feet. It's measured from the bottom of the footing, not what's above grade, if we want to be consistent with the building code.
Oh, you're looking at the current fence ordinance?
Yeah, I'm looking at the
Okay.
current one.
I'm looking at this
Sorry.
draft one, I'm like, B2 is
Sorry.
talking about barbed wire, I'm like, what?
Sorry, yeah, in the current one. I forget where it is in the draft one here. Yeah, it's, C3 in the draft one.
Okay, yeah.
4 feet in height from where the footing is set,
From the bottom of the footing.
not from grade, okay?
Okay, yeah.
I don't think it necessarily needs to be changed, but it's just a point of clarity.
You put it on the fact sheet?
Huh?
Put it on the fact
Yeah,
sheet?
put it on the fact sheet, yep.
Okay, the other item that we talked about, so, the fence was being attached to an existing perimeter fence that is non-conforming in the sense that they don't have an access agreement. And,
Due to the fact that was there before the...
right, and what we did was, is we required an access agreement get put in place for that fence. Is that something we need to deal with on this application, or how are we gonna do that going forward? 'Cause, let me bring that picture back up for myself, let's see, fence plan. So, and I don't, these names on these, it says Bruce Johnson, but that's not the person that was applying for the permit.
If you read
Bruce
it,
is selling the house.
Yeah,
stated in there.
and then Henry Pena has a fence already on the property line, which he is supposed to maintain. And while he had access through his neighbor's property to maintain it, now there will be a gate in the way. So that kind of triggers the need for an access agreement. Is that kind of what we all think, or?
Well, let's say a wind gust came through and knocked out a panel on that fence, and he didn't have access to it. Hypothetical situation. How does it get fixed now? You have to speculate.
Yeah, he talks to his neighbor and says, hey, I need to fix my fence, and the neighbor goes, okay.
And the conversation between the neighbors, I think, is infinitely more valuable than any solution we can come up with here. You know, if I'm an existing fence owner and I don't want to go through the process of getting an access agreement, you know, I could take a very snotty, ugly position of, well, if you don't want me to fix my fence, well, you know, screw you, I won't fix my fence, you know, I guess.
Yeah.
Because this whole thing, in my mind, is trying to get people to talk and communicate and find solutions that work for them, as opposed to us trying to do it for them.
Right, because ultimately, in this situation, that side of the fence is not in public view anymore. So if it does deteriorate and falls out of code, only the neighbor who has to see it is really affected by it. So if he's not gonna let the guy come over and fix his fence, then I guess who's losing out there, right? It's him,
Yeah.
presumably. But
At the end of the day, I would look at the scenario and say that Mr. Pena and forgive me, Mr. Johnson, you know, they need to figure that out. You know, I've got a fence in my backyard. You know, my backyard is an absolute quagmire of fences, and a great example why I think this is kind of a valuable process to have in place. But, you know, my inclination would be to say, hey, if I've got to go on my property, my neighbor's property, to nail a slat back up, I just knock on the door and say, hey, do you mind if I sneak over the fence quick and fix this beat-up old fence? And maybe that's I'm not trying to avoid any conversation here, but maybe the simpler answer is really the best one. I don't know if we could come up with every possible scenario and every possible solution to the problem. But I'm very open to the conversation, very open to other ideas. I mean, I just...
Yep.
So you're saying the requirement for an access agreement is not retroactive to the existing fence?
I don't know how we would pull that off. Maybe I'm wrong. You know, if I've already got a fence in place that didn't require an access agreement, and I don't want to go through the process of getting my neighbors to sign it,
I think that would be, and I think that would be consistent with the theory I just mentioned, is that properly approved and permitted construction is allowed to persist
yeah.
until such time that it's altered. I should say properly maintained as well, they're that as well.
And thank you for saying it that way, much more elegant than anything I could conjure up in between my ears.
So it's not necessarily retroactive. But if things, if something changes, then it's a new day.
We're guessing that they've been maintaining it in the past,
Yeah.
so now all there is an extra gate going up. But, you know, they can just, they must have talked to the neighbors to maintain it in the first place.
Yeah.
One would hope or think. No
Well,
guarantees.
And in this case, I assume Mr. Johnson needs to get an access agreement from Mr. Pena. So Mr. Pena is aware of the challenge at hand associated with maintaining his own fence.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they use that opportunity and have a cup of coffee and say, hey, if Mother Nature comes through and says, hey, takes out a chunk of my fence, am I okay sneaking over there to fix it? Which would be his only option now anyway, is to go on his neighbor's property to fix that fence.
Right.
It's just how he gets there. Good conversations? Any other thoughts, any other ideas?
In this draft neighbor agreement you have here, is it implied that the, access that's being granted, would apply to not only the property owner, but their hired contractors, or not? Because I'm gonna go on a limb and say that most people putting in fences are not doing it themselves. And maybe that's just nitpicking, because if the neighbor's gonna go through the process of notarizing and signing this, they're not gonna care whether it's the person themselves or if it's somebody hired to do fences, but...
So in recital B, where it talks about grantors, the last sentence says, like, grantors represent and warrant that they have the legal authority to grant rights or permissions upon the property in the manner and form set forth after, so... I don't know if that means... whether heirs and signs...
And if you don't have the answer, it's fine, maybe just check with the attorney. Because again, like, the whole point of this is that both properties sell, and they got new owners, and, you know, somebody wants to repair their fence after they figure out who owns it.
That's a good question, I should have
And then, let's see, everything else looks pretty similar to what we saw prior. I would just like to say for the record that while this is definitely a step forward, we're reducing cost, time, that's all good things. I would still like to see us have, in the future, a process for a perimeter fence that does not require an access agreement, because I'm still of the opinion that not every fence requires access to the adjacent property to be built or maintained. So I'd personally like to see a carve-out for that, an option for that to be possible.
I'm gonna have to disagree on that, because I don't know how you'd ever make one that would never, what if it blows over and it goes on the neighbor's property and there's no access agreement, you can't go pick it up?
Then they have a new fence, I guess.
No, but I'm just saying, now you got a legal issue down the road, that's opening up a
Right,
whole nother
right,
legal issue.
But is that our job to solve, or is that neighbors have to get together and be like, hey, your fence blew over into my yard, and you go, yeah, well, I'll come pick it up, and it's like, no.
Well, that's what we're saying here. If you want me to maintain my side of the fence, if your fence is on my property, I want him maintained, and I can't maintain it, and it's your property, you have to come maintain it, you need access to it.
And that's what got us here to this point to
Yeah.
begin with, is
Was
the neighbor-to-neighbor conflict, because we didn't have anything in an ordinance or anything like that. So what we have got put together, because we were having those issues between neighbors. We're coming to this board and the council, trying to fight it out, because we didn't have that, that agreement put in place. So, I mean, I don't disagree. I think there should be, but how that all works, and what kind of fence and what kind of agreement do we get put together, but...
If it's a hedge or a tree fence, and the tree falls onto your property, then that does become your property, according to the way the stated in the ordinances or the laws. If a neighbor, but usually if it's the neighbor's tree and it falls on their property, they're usually willing to come help clean it up.
You would hope, although
But
they're not required.
No. So that one can...
Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? I guess in terms of next steps, Ian, where do you see this going? Are we butting up against a potential public hearing on the matter?
Well, the council did call for a public hearing, so that's going to be held at the next council meeting on October 23rd. So that's where we're going from here, I suppose. Now, it is just a public hearing, so the council doesn't have to, decide on everything necessarily right away. It's just a public hearing.
Gotcha. But you're gonna do that at the council level?
Yep.
Tremendous. So you don't need anything else from us at this stage in the game?
No.
Thank you, sir. Put in a tremendous amount of work in this. I appreciate it. I do. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to discuss this evening?
Well, just one more thing, you didn't bring up on the fence permit application, the recording fees, when you were talking about for the access agreements. Just so people do know there is a recording fee for access agreements.
So that's above and beyond the $50?
It's above and beyond the $100.
The $100, so that's all you're, okay.
Just, but still less than the $300.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to make sure it's noted that...
Just depends how many neighbors you have.
Well,
The increasing cost is our staff.
yes.
Right, yeah.
From the 50 to the 100, that's...
Yeah,
because
yeah.
of...
The recording fees have always been separate.
Are separate.
Yes.
So, there was a $300 application fee, plus
Okay.
you could be spending another $200 on recording fees.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure, because I saw that on there, and...
Yeah, but the recording fees, that's what Dodge County charges. You can't really use that at all. Yeah. Yep.
That's all you had,
Thank you all
sir?
for your comments, I appreciate it very much.
Anything else we need to discuss this evening? All right. If not, I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you again.